All right. Nothing like talking about soft phones at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. Thanks for joining. Just to start here, how many people have heard of CounterPath? Oh, excellent. That's actually more than I thought, because a lot of folks don't know where we are. We are the leading independent vendor of soft endpoints out there. But a lot of folks don't realize that because we're typically behind other brands in the market, some bigger brands. So that's great. What I was going to do today is talk a little bit about the evolution from a soft phone perspective of the endpoints, because a lot of things going on in the space. There's WebRTC, which we hear about. Of course, there's still SIP endpoints quite a bit out there as well, and those are continuing to grow. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these topics through the presentation here. I've got 30 minutes, so let's get going here. Just to kind of, for those that don't know CounterPath, CounterPath is focused on the soft endpoint, but we've actually expanded our focus to include everything from endpoints to full UCC. So that means unified communication, so messaging, team voice, that kind of thing, and team messaging, of course. And also collaboration. So we provide full collaboration services as well as part of our solution. So not just an endpoint company. So I think that's very important. And we do this over any device, any network, and any platform. And that last piece, the platform piece, is really important because a lot of installations out there today are, use Cisco, Asterisk, they use Avaya, whatever they use, our Softphone will work with that call server platform. And then all the other services I just talked about will overlay to that. So you don't have to be stuck with just one type of service from one particular vendor. And one more slide about CounterPath. We have over 21 million clients that have been downloaded, activated, or used out there in the space since our company launch, which just over 17 years ago. We are a public company. You can find us on NASDAQ and TSX as well. A lot of our history is in, of course, I said the endpoints. We spent a lot of time in the IETF defining the standards back in the day that all SIP phones use today. And so a lot of strength in that space and defining it. And that's why we work against a lot of different platforms because we're using quite a different number of them. Just to kind of start off this kind of journey in the presentation here, I wanted to start with this slide just to talk about how, it's a busy slide, but we'll get through it here. Basically, if you take a look at the bottom part of this, you see the traditional service providers and kind of caretakers of the industry. And what that means is, when you needed business services, for example, you go to your carrier or your operator back in the day and say, I need a phone system for my business. And you kind of get what you get. And a lot of that was provided by the traditional OEMs. And that kind of evolved on its own. Didn't have a really, much of a revolution as much of an evolution. And then at the same time, or over time, we had, a services kind of peak of different, what I would call, disruptors in the space. Skype would be the first one. I remember being in a meeting with a very large operator just when Skype came out, and they didn't know who Skype was. This is the CTO office. And I'm not going to name the name of this operator. And we explained what they did. And they said, oh, no one will ever use that software because they can't guarantee 5.9 reliability. They can't, fraud and all this other stuff. And we know what happened there, right? So it's interesting to kind of take that in context that it kind of surprised the traditional operators and kind of what they offered. And so the innovation space of this really kind of shook things up. And like I said, we know what happened with Skype with being acquired by Microsoft. And since then we have Zoom and Slack, kind of these silos of services that have kind of proven out the use case of what users really want, particularly in the SMB space. And it's really kind of brought the attention or got the attention of a lot of these providers who are trying to provide kind of catch up at this point. They're trying to provide solutions that catch up to that, to the point where they're offering solutions from other companies. We see that in the likes of RingCentral being OEM'd into AT&T and to other companies as well. And it's kind of reached down to the folks that typically provide to the service providers, the traditional OEMs, where we saw the announcement with RingCentral and Avaya last week. So I think, what that tells you is that, there's a passing of the torch, of course, of kind of innovation and where things are going. But at the same time, it's really, really proposed a opportunity or given an opportunity for the SMB space, because if you look at the solutions today and some of the feedback that we get, for example, is that yes, there's Zoom, there's Slack, but now I have 7 different solutions that do one thing. Some of them are free, some of them I pay for, but I like that all under one kind of user interface and one kind of solution. So that really is what the middle part of this chart is trying to show, is that it provides this huge opportunity for SMBs today. And that's something that we're seeing, and from an evolutionary perspective on the soft endpoint side, I think you're going to start seeing some of these solutions kind of combine, come together through a single interface, and I think that'll be very exciting for the SMB space. Meanwhile, on the enterprise side, they'll kind of be fed by the traditional OEMs as well. Okay, sure. The next slide here is kind of just over time to show kind of from a very specific, since we're talking about endpoints here, talking about the specific, soft phone side of it. Soft phones have been around quite a while, since I said 2003 timeframe. Here's some examples that we have over time, and we're trying to overlay the internet disruptors here and the overtop providers. Now, if you see that, this shows some of the carrier and operators trying to bring their solutions and trying to catch up to some of the internet over-the-top disruptors there. And some of them have done that. Rogers launched one called Rogers One Number Solution. There's some others out there today, and there continue to be some more. But I think, the real interesting thing is there are going to be some emerging new operators that come out and new services that come out that provide this kind of the single one interface approach I just talked about, that will be, in some cases, from some of the traditional players, but I think it will be more from the emerging operators from what we see, and emerging vendors turned operators. So I think you're going to see some of the vendors that are OEMing the services are trying that, but I think the real ones will actually make the whole switch from being a product company into a services company. And that will really kind of enable them to provide the end-to-end solution that the market wants. And again, the real winners here are going to be the SMBs in this space. The interesting approach that we've kind of seen in the market is that we have kind of 2 camps, with the legacy product-led folks and then the next generation services-led folks in the middle there. And I think the winner in this space, particularly for the SMB, is going to be someone that takes a little bit of both those and provides a path into what we kind of see as threaded communications, or that's what we refer to it. I think maybe Microsoft says the same thing, or they say sessions, I think. Everyone has their own name for this, but basically what's happening is that today people can communicate in different ways. They can communicate with Facebook, WhatsApp, and whatnot in the SMB space. But what we really find is that although that's a possibility, making that uniform into one kind of solution is really what the SMBs want. There's too many choices. Too many choices creates confusion, creates some difficulty in communication, particularly with customers and whatnot. So what we've, and there's a lot of omni-channel type of approaches to this and trying to solve that issue. But what we're seeing in the market and kind of emerging from all this is platform that can really take the single user interface and provide it into this threaded communications, which really is thinking about a communication thread to a one-to-one thread, or a one-to-many thread, or many-to-many thread. And that thread has everything in the context of that communication, from the actual communication itself. So that could be a voice call, that could show up as a recording, a transcript. It could be a file that you sent to someone that could be in that thread. It could be a picture that's in that thread. So a thread is just simply like another word, session, like Microsoft uses, or that type of thing. But it's really about bringing all those communications in line under one unified approach to that. And that's where I think who's going to win at this is going to be someone that provides that kind of communication. And that's where the APIs come into different. We've been obviously talking about that a lot at this event and the programmable aspects of things. to make that happen, those APIs will be leveraged to their full extent to really make that happen, and that'll be something that that will help the solution be kind of unified in what it provides. If you look at the kind of this light orange color underneath, there's some key paths to getting there, and the first one is user management, how we manage the users in the field and that type of thing as it relates to providing the services. And it's not just provisioning. Provisioning sounds like a really boring term because it really is. But when you think about what can be beyond just regular provisioning that we see today, to actually provisioning the user experience, provisioning the workflow integration, things like that, that's when it gets really exciting. And that's really where threaded communications kind of comes in, is trying to match the communications to the workflow of the situation. Where if you look at just 5 years ago, you know, a SMB or an enterprise would buy communication equipment or services and fit that into their workflow. That's no longer something that customers are satisfied with. They really want to take, you know, their workflow and have the communications work with it. And that's something that, of course, you know, drives APIs development and for, you know, companies to adapt that way and that type of thing. But there's a lot of different ways to also adapt into the workflow, from providing something more rich than just APIs on a platform basis, providing SDKs, for example, that can be tucked into an overall service offering that brings things together as well. So I think, you know, from that perspective, I think that's super important to think about how the, you know, the provisioning applies to the product as well, and how you push those things down to end users. Also to the other areas, their analytics and support tools. And analytics has become really important, not just BI side of it, but also the technical side of it too, and how they marry up together. A lot of the initiatives that we do from an endpoint perspective with customers is very much based upon how analytics plays into the actual workflow for the customer. So, for example, call centers, when someone's making a call into the call center, what is the call quality, not just from a, you know, packet drop perspective or that type of thing, but also what's the richness of the call, the experience, are they getting the information they need, things like that. So all these things have to work together to provide the seamless solution that can become very competitive in the marketplace. The other point here, desktop to mobility, that's something that we found that the legacy vendors have kind of not really paid attention to too much. They see the Softphone as just something that's an endpoint. It's just, you know, kind of along with the solution. But actually, it's the face of the service. It's what the user interacts with. It's what they yell at when it doesn't work. So it needs to be very much attuned to kind of, you know, to the user, of course, but the user experience is really important. For example, on the mobility side, if you use a lot of soft phones today and you're on Wi-Fi and then you walk outside, get in your car, switches to LTE, that call will drop. That's a really bad user experience, and it shouldn't work that way. By the way, CounterPath, we don't drop the call, even though we're just a client there. But little pitch, sorry, shameless pitch there. But those things are important, though, from a usability perspective, because users won't use the product otherwise. And it really drives them to use their cell phone, for example, for all calls, which if you're a real estate brokerage or a financial institution, you don't necessarily want that, right? So you want the phone calls to be on your number and the numbers that you control. So that's another important piece. And then, of course, the UC and the collaboration piece is also super important, because those tie together to the end user experience. And collaboration is significant because if you can bring collaboration in a meaningful way to, particularly I go back to the SMB space, and put it to their workflow, that's super helpful. Because, for example, I'm not just talking about getting on a collab call and sharing information with a customer. I'm talking about folks that are, for example, like a plumber, for example, that's at a household and they fix something, they leave, and then it starts leaking again. Using collaboration, the customer can actually leverage that and show what they see on, you know, video collab back to the plumber that just left, and it kind of brings that back into the workflow, back into the experience, and the plumber can say, oh, I just tightened this down there, or whatever the case may be. We see it in medical a lot, where it's used to do follow-up for patients, and it's a collaboration scenario, but it's really, again, attached to the workflow. It's not about a collab experience in a generic sense. So those things right there, I think what's happening is the industry's learning, and they saw what the past from the legacy vendors, and they saw what the disruptors have done, and I think there's going to be new emerging technologies that come out that kind of get to this threaded communications piece of it. So who will win is those that can work with different platforms that are out there today. So interoperability is still going to be key. It's kind of funny because if you look at what SIP provided back in the day when it was becoming popular, it was all about interoperability and being able to have multiple platforms work with different platforms, work with different endpoints. And now you look at the market today, it's kind of becoming more siloed and proprietary, especially when it gets to collaboration and threaded communications, the topic I just talked about. You have to buy a certain vendor, otherwise it won't work with other solutions. So I think that's something that needs to be broken down a bit, and I think those that do work with others will certainly do that. So when you look at some of the folks that have been really well at this, like Slack, who has a ton of interoperability and API extensions to other partners, they kind of get that piece of it, and I think that's going to be really important for them as well. The other one is around multiple device support. Very important to support every device that comes out because customers are going to require it. It's that simple. That's where I think things like WebRTC come in to play. As a client company, I'm always asked, what wins SIP or WebRTC, and I'm always confused by that because they're totally two different things. One's a protocol for signaling, and the other one's a data. is really a data, an RTP piece inside of a browser. So our media kit, I should say. So for us, we use both. Like we use WebRTC in our Bria product. We use it for website use as well. And when I mean website use, I'm talking specifically about a web client connecting into collaboration type services. And then we use SIP when it makes sense, and we use our client in that way. So for me, it's what's the best technology to use for the right scenario, and I think that's a key point. But I do think WebRTC is important to support. And I do think that supporting proprietary applications on these different devices are also very important as well. And so that's that second point. The next one is being able to customize and continually innovate across different scenarios and workflows for customers. There's always API support, things like that we've been talking about, but there's also things that you can't predict and can't do. So it's good to have a ability to let customers customize and let it fit to their workflow and that type of thing. And I think that's something that's really important. It's always been important to our industry, and I think it's going to continue to be that way in the Softpoint space. The last one is security. And as an endpoint, yesterday's session, we're talking about fraud, and it's interesting because on the endpoint we're kind of at the end of the call, and for us it's a little bit different. So that's where I'm coming from in this section here. There's a lot of other considerations that aren't listed there. Could fill up probably 30 pages of a PowerPoint here, but you can see that these are the ones that are really around the endpoint side of it. Of course, the MDM and EMM space is super important for the endpoint because that's how IT folks can manage remotely the deployments and the usage of the apps in some cases, and that's really important for a lot of vendors to support. But also on the signaling and media side and making sure that's encrypted, that's hugely important for a lot of our customers that are deploying. It's always a number one ask of us and how that's rolled out. And with that, and coming to the end here, I have time for some questions, but hopefully that was a quick journey through kind of an evolution, kind of some of the observations that we've seen in the market, and hopefully that was somewhat helpful for you. But I'm available for any questions, if there are any questions in the audience.
Great, thanks. That was excellent, Todd. Any questions from the audience? I'll start with one, which is that scenario of you take the call from your cell phone because you know you're going to be popping out of the office, and then it transfers onto the mobile network once you have the Wi-Fi coverage. It's a dumb one, but boy, for a lot of companies that are just moving to this magical thing called VoIP, because again, for most businesses out there, VoIP is new.
Right.
Even though it's been around 20 odd years, it's new. So I'm just interested in how you manage that handover, because that is a major failure point, yet it's a key selling point for a lot of businesses that are just discovering it's possible with VoIP.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because your cell phone always works no matter, well, assuming you have coverage.
Yeah.
Always will work, right? And it doesn't matter where you are from a geolocation perspective and that sort of thing. There's a couple ways to do it. There's the mobile way to do it and kind of intertwine yourself into the mobile core and an IMS core and be a application called VCC. That's a 3GPP standard application and approach to doing it. And the network core handles that handover, which we supported as well in the past. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it on the client side is basically doing a media reinvite. Is what you can do. Is you can tell the server, or you can change the address on the server side, say send the media here, basically. That's another way to do it.
Perfect. Again, it's an opportunity. We got Todd here. It's very interesting, some of the work he's doing on WebRTC. So people, it's a term, and there's two different things. There's the WebRTC project with all the open source cool stuff, and then there's that bloody browser API. In your endpoints, do you ever use the browser API, or is it all your software with a wrap around the sort of open source WebRTC components?
Yeah, so we use WebRTC for the media piece inside of Bria, which makes sense because we made our own media stack and back in the day, and things change and evolution changed, and it's sad not to develop your own. But when you have an army of engineers that are working on WebRTC, why would you do that, especially when it's free, right? So we definitely embrace WebRTC from that perspective, but we do a lot of work around the edges to make it fit within the desktop, make it fit within the mobile, make it behave in some cases. And then, of course, we use it as is and for collaboration inside of browsers for our collaboration client. So for us, when I look at, when I talk to customers about collaboration, there's three ways that we approach it. There's the best, better, and good. And the best approach is if you use Bria. Yeah. Always. It's never going to be any better than that. And then the better approach is if you're on a web browser, you have a downloadable.
Exactly.
And then a good approach, if you can't have that, is just WebRTC, right? And
until a Chrome update happens.
Yes, so that's the issues that we have, right? Yeah. At least today. And so this is why when you go to Zoom, you go to Blue Jeans and all these other guys, that's why they try to get you to download, right? Because it's basically a headless client that's using probably JavaScript for the UI. I can't speak exactly for the development. Yeah. And APIs down to that download. And so we do the same. That's what we do. In fact, our Salesforce integration that we have, we use a JavaScript UI inside of Salesforce with APIs directly into the Bria application on the desktop. Yeah. So every time call comes in, you make a call out, we're recording into Salesforce. When you close Salesforce, then you can use Bria as a regular phone without that integration. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's excellent, Todd. Again, let's show appreciation for a great presentation and
Q&A.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks for